I'm Timothy, and I got something special for you. From a man who had a lit cigarette in his hand while fueling up his motorcycle, to a teenager who decided that running between oncoming traffic was a good way to prove something to his friends. These are the kinds of stories I'm unpacking today. People dying because of their own stupidity. It was May 3, 2016, at a roadside fuel station on the eastern outskirts of Jaipur, India. A strip of cracked asphalt between tea stalls and idle auto rickshaws where the evening heat sat unmoving and where one man's refusal to be corrected in front of strangers was about to cost both him and his wife everything they had. Raghav Sethi was 32 years old and worked as a daily wage construction laborer in Jaipur. He poured concrete, hauled rebar, and picked up extra shifts whenever the foreman offered them, because the money was never quite enough for the apartment he shared with his wife Meera and their 5-year-old son in one of the city's lower-income districts. That evening, they were on their way back home after he had finished a late shift, planning to pick up food along the way because their son had been asking for something sweet. People who knew him described him as stubborn, but I think not in a calculating way, but in the specific way of a man with limited power in most areas of his life, who made a point of not surrendering what small amounts he did have. He was the kind of person who made things worse by digging in, and this incident just proves it. He arrived at the station on his battered motorcycle that evening, with Meera seated directly behind him. A half-smoked cigarette was still burning between his fingers when he pulled alongside the pump. The attendant had already opened the fuel cap in preparation to start filling and noticed immediately, moving toward him, shouting. A bystander later told investigators the attendant was not subtle. He pointed directly at the cigarette and raised his voice clearly. Raghav did not dismount. Witnesses described him arguing back and gesturing broadly while the cigarette continued to burn in his hand. The attendant stepped closer, his voice sharper now, motioning toward the pump and then at the ground, as if urging him to put it out immediately. Raghav shook his head and said something back that several people described as dismissive. Raghav leaned slightly forward over the tank as the attendant continued speaking. The two of them now locked in a back and forth that drew everyone's attention. Meera remained seated behind him. The attendant gestured again, more urgently this time, pointing directly at the cigarette. Witnesses said Raghav flicked the cigarette in a dismissive gesture toward the tank opening, and the ember landed among the rising gasoline vapors, igniting them almost instantly. Whether it was deliberate provocation or recklessness, no one present could say with certainty. But what I do know is that the ignition was instantaneous. There was a low, concussive thump. Multiple witnesses used that exact description independently, followed immediately by fire spreading across the fuel pooled on the concrete beneath the motorcycle. Raghav's synthetic work shirt, the kind sold cheaply at any market stall, did not burn away from his body. It fused into the tissue beneath it within the first few seconds of contact. Meera's clothing caught from the rear of the motorcycle, fire moving up her back before she could react or flail her arms in an attempt to escape. I want to be clear about what that means physically. Synthetic fabric in direct contact with open flame doesn't give you time. It is already over before your body has registered what's happening. Bystanders moved toward them almost immediately. Several grabbed water buckets kept near the station wash area. Others used cloth. The fire had already taken deep hold before anyone reached them. Witnesses dragged both victims away from the motorcycle onto the open road surface. Burning fuel on the concrete continued to feed the fire even after both of them had been pulled clear of the bike. Raghav's face and hands bore the worst of the initial flash exposure. Meera's back and left arm were described by responding personnel as consistent with sustained flame contact. One shopkeeper who witnessed the entire sequence told investigators the screaming had stopped before emergency services arrived. In burn cases of this severity, that is not a sign of improvement. A fire unit and ambulance arrived approximately 8 minutes later. Both were pronounced dead before transport. The medical examiner's findings indicated full-thickness burns covering more than 85% of total body surface area in both individuals. Their son was 5 years old. He was left in the care of Raghav's elderly parents. Neighbors reported seeing him in the days that followed, moving quietly around the apartment building without apparent understanding of what had occurred. What Raghav did that evening was never going to hurt only himself. Mira was sitting directly behind him, and she had not argued with the attendant once. That is the part of this story that I cannot move past, and I don't think I should. But if you thought ignoring warnings at a gas station was reckless, wait until you hear what happens when a group of friends decides to turn a tractor tire into a homemade rocket. It was August 11th, 2017, on the western outskirts of Lahore, Pakistan, where a flat, sun-cracked vacant lot sat wedged between a shuttered textile warehouse and a row of low concrete homes. The kind of place that accumulates both trash and young men with nowhere better to be on a Friday afternoon. Rashad Mirza was 21 years old and worked part-time loading freight. He had grown up 3 streets from the lot and had been part of this group since he was 15. His reputation inside the circle was straightforward. He was the one who always volunteered first. His older brother later told investigators that Rashad had been saving money to enroll in a vocational welding program and had already paid the registration fee the week before. That detail stayed with me. The fee was still recorded in his phone's expense notes, sitting there. The group had no particular plan going into that afternoon. These gatherings rarely did. Someone had sourced a large agricultural tractor tire weeks earlier, and over several sessions, they had rigged a motorized spinning frame from scavenged engine parts and salvaged steel pipe. The concept, loosely, was to build enough rotational force in the tire and release it down a bamboo and warped plywood ramp, watching how far it would travel. Several of them had already run smaller tests with car tires. Nobody in the group had any background in mechanics or applied physics. I think as far as they were concerned, none was needed. A large agricultural tractor tire of this type typically measures around 5 feet in diameter and weighs close to 300 pounds. The ramp they had assembled was not anchored to the ground. The plywood had already warped from previous sessions in the heat. That afternoon, the tire had been spinning for close to 4 minutes before anyone moved toward the release mechanism. Rashad stepped forward to check the alignment between the ramp and the frame. He was standing within roughly 2 feet of the tire's projected path. One of his friends positioned himself at the release. The countdown started, loud and half-joking, the way these things often begin. The frame had begun to wobble slightly under the strain, but no one stepped back. The tire did not travel down the ramp. The moment the restraint released, the motorized frame torqued sideways, the result of uneven tension in the motor mount that no one had identified or checked. The motor continued spinning briefly as the frame twisted, adding to the unpredictability of the tire's trajectory. The tire launched at an oblique angle rather than straight forward. It covered approximately 6 feet in under a quarter of a second. It struck Rashad across the forehead and the right orbital region. Witnesses described the sound as flat and immediate, distinct from the dull impact the tire made when it hit the ground a moment later. Rashad dropped straight down, no stumbling, no bracing. The way a person drops when the connection between brain and body is severed faster than the body can respond to it. He was on his back. Blood spread across the dry, pale soil rapidly. Splinters from the warped plywood had scattered in a radius of roughly 15 feet. The spinning frame was still partially powered for a few seconds before shutting down on its own. Witnesses later described standing there for several seconds before anyone moved, long enough that one of the friends closest to him said he believed for a moment that Rashad would get up. He did not. 2 friends began CPR within minutes. A third ran to the street and flagged down a nearby resident who contacted the local emergency rescue service by phone. Responders arrived on scene in approximately 15 minutes. Rashad was unresponsive when they reached him and did not recover. The coroner's report identified the cause of death as severe closed head trauma with a depressed skull fracture. The part I keep returning to is the welding course registration, the fee already paid, logged in his phone the week before. He had a plan beyond that lot. And I don't think any of the friends standing there that afternoon understood what they had actually built until it was too late for the understanding to mean anything. All right, this next one hits differently, because unlike Rashad, where there was at least some chaos and momentum you could point to, this next guy had 28 seconds of complete calm before the ground just decided it was done with him. It was June 22, 2015, on the Skagerrak coastline in Västra Götaland County, Sweden, where the North Sea grinds against gneiss shelves that have been fracturing quietly for centuries, long before anyone thought to stand on the edge of them. Emmerich Das was 28 years old and worked part-time at a regional print studio. Photography was what actually occupied him. Coastal landscapes mostly, overcast water and granite shelves shot in flat morning light. His friends described him as someone who prioritized proximity to his subject over everything else. Based on what I've read, he had a consistent habit of deciding that closer was always better than safer. The trip to the Skagerrak coast had been his idea. He had identified the location through satellite imagery and wanted wide-angle shots of the water from the edge. He brought 2 camera bodies and a tripod. The tripod had been positioned on the stable portion of the ledge, but one camera rested precariously on the edge of the slab. His 3 friends came along the way people do when someone they like is enthusiastic, without strong opinions of their own. There was no formal trail to the ledge. They scrambled over loose fieldstone for roughly a quarter mile from the nearest parking area before reaching the edge. No barriers, ropes, or warning markers existed before the accident, as this stretch was considered informal and seldom patrolled. The group reached the edge in late morning. Emmerich shot for roughly 40 minutes before noticing a large detached slab near the lip, approximately 6 feet across and visibly separated from the shelf beneath it on one side. One friend later told investigators the gap was obvious once you looked for it, and that the ground immediately surrounding the slab felt different underfoot, less resistant, slightly yielding. Emmerich registered this. One of them pointed out the gap again, but no one stepped back. After a brief pause, giggling at the precariousness, and on a sudden impulse, they collectively decided to push it for fun, neither fully registering the risk. The group began pushing the slab toward the edge anyway. The slab moved after several seconds of combined effort. That part went as expected. What followed did not. The section of ledge beneath the slab had already fractured along a horizontal plane, and the lateral force was enough to complete the separation. A roughly 10-foot section of the outer lip dropped. Emmerich was standing directly on it. I've read enough of these to know that the ground feeling wrong and continuing anyway is its own kind of decision. He did not fall clean. He tumbled with the collapsing slab, arms flailing briefly as he struck jagged edges. His 3 friends were close enough to feel the vibration through the soles of their boots before they scrambled back from the new edge. One of them described to investigators seeing Emmerich's shoulders drop below the ledge line as the rock face came apart around him. Dust rose immediately, and smaller rock fragments skittered down, some bouncing off the shelf below before settling. The drop was approximately 60 feet onto a broken rock shelf above the waterline. The geology of the shelf meant there was no soil or sand to absorb any part of what arrived, only fractured gneiss, uneven and angled toward the water. The 3 friends reached the new edge within seconds of the collapse. Nothing below was moving. One of them called Regional Emergency Services immediately. A Coast Guard unit arrived by water within 25 minutes. Emmerich was confirmed dead at the scene. The coroner's report determined cause of death to be massive blunt force trauma from a fall of approximately 60 feet, combined with impact from descending rock debris. Findings included open skull fracture, complete disruption of the thoracic cavity, bilateral rib fractures, traumatic aortic rupture, and comminuted fractures of both lower extremities. Examination also showed multiple abrasions and contusions from sliding across jagged rock before impact. Death was not survivable and was likely near instantaneous at the moment of impact. Regional authorities placed warning markers at the cliff access point within the week. Local news covered it briefly, framing it as a regional cautionary item. No memorial was placed at the site per the family's wishes. Emmerich's friends gave statements to investigators and did not return. So, the ground already felt wrong before they started pushing, and everyone standing there knew it. The decision to continue anyway isn't something I can fully explain, and I'm not sure the people who were there can either. But this next story features a guy who had every chance to stop, and he still held on. It was December 31st, 2015, in the Kreuzberg district of Berlin, Germany, where a neighborhood celebration had been building since dusk, the kind of gathering that ends with someone on the ground and everyone else standing over them, trying to remember what they should have said an hour earlier. Emre Voss was 27 years old and worked the morning counter at a small, independent coffee shop in the Neukölln district, where he had been a fixture for 3 years. Co-workers described him as magnetic and exhausting in equal measure, someone who turned every routine moment into a performance. His close friends had a shorter version. He didn't know when to stop. As I read further into the story, apparently, he had no history of recklessness beyond his general appetite for being the center of things. He had purchased a collection of consumer fireworks from a street vendor earlier that evening, which in Berlin on New Year's Eve is as routine as buying bread. The larger rocket-type devices he bought were roughly 14 inches long and built to be placed upright in a bottle or tube before ignition. He held the rocket awkwardly at an upward angle in his bare hand, rather than placing it in a bottle for stability. He had been the one to suggest the fireworks, the one to carry them across the neighborhood, and the one who decided sometime around 11:40 p.m. that he wanted to hold one at an angle rather than setting it on the pavement. His friends told him to put it down. He laughed. The street outside was lit by the ambient glow of the city and scattered pops from adjacent blocks. The temperature was below freezing. A light layer of snow covered the cobblestones. The group had been together for hours. The mood loose and celebratory. The kind of night where someone's bad idea gets laughed off until it doesn't. He gripped the device in his right hand, angled upward and away from the group, fuse burning. At least 2 people stepped back. One reached toward him. The rocket wobbled slightly as he gripped it, a subtle motion unnoticed by most of the group before the explosion. He adjusted his grip. Despite repeated warnings, the fuse was already too short to react once he ignored them. The device detonated in his palm. Witnesses described the explosion as immediate and total. No escalation, no warning distinct from the hiss of the fuse. The primary blast fractured his right hand at the metacarpal bones, with the concussive force traveling upward through the wrist. Shrapnel, casing fragments, and propellant debris entered his lower face and throat. He was standing when it happened. I want to be direct about this. Every person in that group saw what was about to happen. This was not a malfunction. He was on the ground within seconds. The snow around him showed visible blood spread across an area of roughly 3 feet. 2 friends reached him immediately. One pressed a jacket against his face and throat. Another ran toward the nearest corner, calling for emergency services. A third witness was described as standing completely motionless. Nobody in that group was trained for what they were looking at. Emergency services arrived within 12 minutes. Paramedics worked at the scene before transport. He was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. The coroner's findings, in plain terms, Emre died from blast-related trauma to the right hand, face, and anterior throat. The primary cause of death was hemorrhagic shock, resulting from vascular disruption in the neck. Shrapnel had severed or lacerated major vessels that could not be controlled in the field. The hand injuries alone would have required surgical intervention. The throat injuries were not survivable without immediate access to an operating room. Police recovered fragments of the device from the scene. His friends held a private gathering the following week. No formal memorial was placed at the site. The firework did exactly what it was engineered to do. It just did it in someone's hand. His friends warned him more than once, and I don't think any of them have stopped thinking about whether one more word would have changed anything. Probably not. Some decisions close faster than the people around them can react. The fuse was already lit before anyone realized the conversation was effectively over. That's not a comfort. It's just what happened. This next one left me shaking my head for a different reason. It's not about fireworks or New Year's, but about a late-night dare on a Nevada highway. It was July 18, 2014, on an unlit stretch of Interstate 95 in southern Nevada, where the highway runs flat through open scrubland for 30 miles without a single light source beyond the vehicles using it. Merrick Dunlow was 19 years old and had graduated from a regional high school in Pahrump, Nevada, 6 weeks before that night. He worked part-time at a convenience store off the main commercial strip, pulling closing shifts, stocking shelves, and running the register. People who knew him consistently described the same pattern. He measured his standing among others by how they reacted to him. And the reaction he sought most was the one that came right after something went wrong, but not badly enough to matter. That night, he drove out to the highway that night with 4 friends in 2 vehicles. The game of chicken was not prearranged. It emerged on the shoulder within minutes of stopping, which tells you something about how the group operated. Marek volunteered immediately. 2 friends aimed flashlights across the asphalt from behind the guardrail. A third held a phone up to record. Before I continue with the story, I want you to know that the setup, with people on foot and vehicles stopped on a 70 miles per hour interstate, would be considered highly illegal and could be grounds for criminal charges if observed by police. 1 vehicle passed in the near lane, and the road opened briefly. Marek stepped off the shoulder, wearing a dark hoodie that blended into the unlit roadway. Marek reached the painted center line, roughly 24 feet from the shoulder, and stopped. The pause lasted 2 to 3 seconds based on footage recovered from a friend's phone. A pickup traveling eastbound at an estimated 72 miles per hour was approaching from his right. Investigators later placed the distance between Marek and the front of the truck at approximately 650 feet at the moment he went still. At 106 feet per second, that is just over 6 seconds. I've thought about that number more than I expected to when I started writing this. 6 seconds is enough time to understand what is coming toward you, and still not enough time for your body to do anything meaningful about it. Marek did not move. Witnesses on the shoulder later described him as completely stationary, facing the oncoming lane. The pickup driver told investigators he did not see Marek until he was approximately 200 feet away. He applied the brakes immediately, but the truck was still traveling at an estimated 60 miles per hour at the point of contact. The front right corner of the vehicle struck Marek at chest height. The impact threw him approximately 38 feet from the point of strike. He landed on the eastbound shoulder and did not move again. The truck skidded another 90 feet before coming to a full stop. Friends on the shoulder began screaming within seconds of impact. One placed a 911 call immediately. The driver exited his vehicle and remained at the scene. Emergency services only confirmed death when they arrived. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as blunt force polytrauma, complete sternal fracture, bilateral pulmonary laceration, traumatic aortic rupture, and severe traumatic brain injury. Consistent with high-speed vehicle strike, death was near instantaneous upon impact. The footage from his friend's phone was reviewed by investigators and subsequently returned to the family. The convenience store where he worked filled his shift within days, not out of indifference, but because the overnight hours still needed to be covered. I think it's a scary thought that the world made a small adjustment and kept moving, and the only people still carrying the full weight of that night are the ones who were standing on the shoulder with flashlights in their hands.